Hello again, and welcome to another session of the 18th Annual Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment Virtual Conference. I'm Bob Hales, I'm your moderator. Happy President's Day, though I'm not sure how one celebrates it other than spend money on President Day sales, but be that as it may. Don't forget, we're sponsored this year by the Journal of Educators Online, a referee journal with lots of interesting articles I've found, and probably something you'll find as well. You can check it out at thejeo.com. We have with us today Andrew Feldstein, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Uh, Andrew is the Assistant Provost for Teaching, Innovation, and Learning Technologies, which sounds like a lot of fun.
It actually is.
Um, he's going to talk about human first, AI enabled, building connection, belonging, and social capital in online learning. So, Andrew, let me turn it over to you. All yours.
Thank you, Bob. All right. So this is something I've been thinking about for quite a long time, although um, thinking on this topic considerably over the last few years. And I just sort of want to start by reflecting on the fact that if you think about the last 5 years, uh, we've had some very, very dramatic changes happening in higher education and the world in general. That started with the pandemic, which really started to affect our campuses here in March of 2020, all the way through November of 22 and onward, when generative AI decided it was going to take center stage. And so, but what I'm going to be talking about today is sort of kind of the journey of my thinking in terms of how higher ed has changed in very interesting ways through that 5 year period. Of course, the human first part was where we were sitting when we were first told that we were all going home in March of 2020. And then the AI enabled piece hit a couple of years later. And we're going to talk about how all of this fits together. Um, you can see my quote here on this slide. Uh, Tiger to Tiger is a community that we built on campus here in early 2021 as kind of a reaction to certain things that we found out um, through the pandemic. And in May of 2020, after that first semester that we had all been away from campus and our students were feeling a little bit lost, we did a survey. And in that survey, the first thing we wanted to find out was how well we did in delivering learning online during that emergency remote teaching protocol. And so we asked a lot of procedural questions. Did you get your questions answered? Were your syllabi accurate? Were your due dates accurate? Were your instructors responsive? Things along those lines. But we asked one final question at that point in time, and the question we asked was sort of a no, really. Everybody's world had been turned upside down during the course of the pandemic. How did this impact your life as a college student taking courses during this period of time? A lot of responses to this were heartbreaking. We had students talking about how lonely they felt. We had students telling about their loss of motivation. We had that was sort of the predominant theme. But as we were seeing all these answers to this open-ended question, one of the more interesting things was the number of students who basically said there was no change from prior to the pandemic. And so the first thing we did was something that we probably should have done to start, which was we disaggregated the responses between our on-campus faculty that had been displaced and our online students. And the 36% was online students that said that they had no change at all. And this, thinking about it from where we were sitting in May of 2020, which for me was in a little anteroom in my house, which had never meant to be an office, which, because my wife had the actual office upstairs, without me being able to do the things that I enjoyed doing, which was getting up out of my office and talking to people down the hall, lots of close communications, and there was this real isolating feeling or experienced before in an educational learning environment. And so to have 30%, 36% of our students say that there was no change when the campus closed sort of led us to understand that we had some work to do to try to help connect those students to us. And so that was the beginning of our introduction to a community that we built called Tiger to Tiger. We built it with a company called Inscribe. We reached out to them a couple of months later, and between October in 2020 and end of February 2021, we had built a community which was designed for students, by students. It was not designed as a Q&A platform. It was not designed as a talk to your faculty or talk to administration. This was designed specifically for students to be able to connect with one another however they wanted to connect with one another. Part of the reason and the need for the community is we identify a lot of our online students as transformational students. This differs from many folks feel that we have a lot of students who are, they would label as transactional students. Transactional students, meaning that these are students, they're here, they want to get their degree, they want to check that box, and they're going to go out in the world and do what they need to do. But for many of our students, and we're here in Western Kansas, and we have a lot of our students, actually 66% or so of our online students are somewhere in Kansas, and many of them are out here in small communities in Western Kansas. And for them, getting their online degree is kind of a moonshot. They know they want to do this because, well, again, these online students are primarily female. They're in their mid-30s. They are working. They have children, and they're married. And so but they're trying to do better for their families, and they're trying to be able to do better for their communities. But they don't necessarily believe in themselves enough to be confident to know that this is going to work for them. So without the type of connection for a community this way, many of them feel that they're the only ones in that course or in that program that are not necessarily understanding what's happening. There may be a recorded lecture online, and because they're not in a classroom and because they can't see the people around them and they can't see the reactions that other people are having to that lecture, they'll miss out on seeing the confused look on somebody sitting next to them's face, or the nodding of the head of understanding of another student. So they're not necessarily going to see how other students are reacting, and a natural response is going to be that they're going to think that everybody else is getting this except for me. And they're not going to reach out to their instructor for the same reason. And they're not going to reach out to other students in their class for the same reason, because they don't want to be seen as the only one that doesn't understand what's happening. And so the creation of the Tiger to Tiger platform was to give those students a space to be able just to talk to one another, not specifically within classes, but around classes. This was a platform for the community. So students didn't have to be talking about how specifically things were going in any particular class. They could just talk about anything that they wanted to. And when this platform went live in March of 2021, it was an outpouring of students. And the first thing that they were asking to one another in that community was, will you be my friend? I've been in this program for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and I've never really met anybody or talked to anyone outside of the classroom. And it was really amazing to see the students connecting for the first time this way. Right now, we have an average of approximately 1,200 students in any given semester that are on this platform, and they're talking about things that are meaningful to them. One of the more interesting threads nowadays came up in January. The thread was titled "The Struggle is Real," and one of the main topics on that thread from the students was that they missed many of them in courses that did not do video lectures. They missed video lectures, and they were hoping that more people would do video lectures. One of the more powerful conversations that took place a couple of years ago was a student who asked the question, or it was more of a statement of, maybe I'm too old. And they went on to explain that this was late in 2021. And they explained that this was the most difficult semester that they had had. And they were struggling mightily. And maybe they were just too old to do this, and it was too late for them to go back to school. And this is a student-to-student community. And so this is not the reason that I see a post like this is because there's sort of an AI alert built in so that the administrators of the community get to see if there's essentially negative affect happening, if there are comments that might be considered to be worrisome or negative in nature. So I saw that post when it came through. Now I have a non-involvement policy that I'm not going to go in and really get myself involved in the platform. Faculty are not expected to be in that platform because this is designed as a safe space for students, but it was my fervent wish at that very moment that other students would respond. And the responses came fast and furious, and students reassuring one another that no, they were not too old, and telling them how long they'd been in the program. And, someone said, I'm 52 years old. I've been doing this for 6 years. I'm almost done. I know how important this is. Don't give up. And so at the end of the first 2 days, because this is a social platform, there were over 340 views of this thread. And I believe that through that thread, through that statement, and through the support that person got, and through the 300 and change folks that actually looked at that response over a couple of days, we saved a couple of students at the very least. And for me, that is why this community exists. And you see over here that there are, this was one of the very first responses, and people are still on the community looking for friends. And it is very important. It's a way for students to ground themselves, knowing that they're not alone, knowing that there are others out there with similar goals. And so this community, as it continues, remains to be a very important aspect of our online student lives. Where this fits in to general pedagogical principles is we talk about network learning. And we talk about the fact that learning itself is a social activity. It's not something that happens in isolation. It is not the traditional ivory tower thought of, we think our thoughts in silence and we come up with great ideas. Where we come up with ideas is by the friction of having to actually express our ideas to other people in situations where we have to be brave enough to know that other people's ideas are going to make ours better and to be able to share those ideas. And so this becomes a really important part of the process. And these were some of the principles around which not only did we build our Tiger to Tiger platform, but around which we've been attempting through the last few years to redesign and reinforce what we're calling our teaching and learning ecosystem, which is not simply Blackboard as a learning management system. It is, how do we build in opportunities for faculty and students within courses and around courses to be able to connect and communicate with others if they don't have that natural way to connect that our face-to-face on-campus students do. And so there are some basic principles of community that we've been deploying in terms of building that ecosystem, as well as that we used in building our Tiger to Tiger community. And so we look at some of the basic community building properties that are important to have within Tiger to Tiger, within a lot of the other types of community and social learning activities that we're building. First of all is trust. If there is no trust in the community, and then people are not likely to want to share with one another. And then there's dialogue, and we're seeing that in spades in our Tiger to Tiger community. And we're promoting this more and more to be happening in our in-course communities as well, so that we can get people to open up about questions that they have, struggles that they're having within the course. And of course, there's reciprocity, where people are not just taking advice, but sharing advice. And all of these are helping to build strong communities. The last piece of this, and this is and I want to talk a little bit about weak ties, because weak ties is one of the more important aspects of why not only has our Tiger to Tiger community been successful, but why a lot of what we do in our online learning has been successful. Back in the early 1970s, Mark Granovetter did some seminal research on weak ties. And back then, what he discovered was that, and this was done in his courses at Harvard back then, and he found out that when students were going out into the work world, they were successful in getting jobs and employment, not from their strong ties being close friends and family, relatives, the folks that they spent a lot of time with that were in their circles, as you will, but from weak ties, people that were connected to people that they knew, but weren't directly as part of their close ties. And the value of those weak ties, not just in jobs, but in getting information and to understanding the world around you, is essential as we go out in the world to learn things. For those that are our strong ties, we tend to share values and we tend to share beliefs and opinions. And so if we are in that, as they're calling it these days, in that bubble, then we're going to be self-reinforced in what those values and resources, and that's not going to help us grow and learn things other than what we already know. And so this becomes a really, really important part of what we're doing in terms of students and in terms of critical thinking and in terms of learning, is to encourage them to look beyond the things that they think are obvious and the things that they think that they know. Now, I'm going to transition here for a little bit because the weak tie piece is going to come into play much, much more differently now that we're in a world in which generative AI is sort of taken center stage. And I want to start with a study that was conducted back, well, it was reported early in 2025. And that study was, it was done at MIT. And what they did was they put groups together and they had software that tracked group activity. Each group was assigned, they were doing copywriting for some sort of advertising. And so each group was assigned to do that assignment of that activity as a group activity. They had a control group that were just people in the group, and then they had another set of groups that had AI in the middle of the group. And what was interesting in this study was that they were able to report when the study was over that 60% of that there was a 60% improvement in how well the project was done, how quickly the project was done in the groups that had AI in the middle of it. So introducing an AI chatbot into that group increased productivity and increased the quality of the product. Now, they also said, and they reported the 23% that I've got here on this slide, that there was a 23% decrease in social and emotional communication, meaning that there wasn't less communication. It's just that the communication within the groups that had AI involved were more about, let's get this project done. How do I do this next step? How do I do this next step? So it was a lot of procedural stuff. And a lot of it was, and so what was missing, what was gone, was what the authors sort of framed as the off-topic parts of the conversation. And I sort of read that, and the first time, and my reaction was, okay, I understand that maybe if we're in a purely business productivity mindset, that may make sense. But the 23% is where the learning takes place. It's where people start. This is where we go back to this slide. This is where the trust and the dialogue and the reciprocity and the weak ties come into play. If we're removing all of that and letting it, if you can see the little image here, and letting the chatbot take center stage, all of that is missing. But at the same time, the learning how to go about the task, the learning to generalize the task that's being done past the task that they were doing in this particular study, that's the part that's missing. And so what you're essentially doing when you're adding a chatbot into a network like this is you are dismantling the network itself. Now, back in the early 80s, Barry Wellman out of Toronto introduced a concept called networked individualism. And this goes back to our conversation about strong ties versus weak ties. And what Wellman argued was that strong ties, the loss of strong ties, which was something that was happening in the 80s and a lot of people were worried about it, wasn't necessarily a negative when it came to human networks, because by creating weak ties with folks that weren't in your direct community, you'd be exposed to new information, you'd be exposed to new ideas, you'd be able to expand your network and to be able to learn and grow that way. And that made a lot of sense at that time. But what's happening now, and this is, I'm making a connection between what Wellman referred to as networked individualism, where instead of just sticking within your strong tie networks, you reached out and developed weak tie networks. Brenzig, and this again is 2025 research because there's an awful lot of AI research coming out these days, talked about how AI, because it is simple to go to an AI chatbot and ask a question that you might have had to ask someone else at one point, but now you're going to get the AI answering a lot of these questions, many of these questions being particularly focused on the things that weak ties do best, but that the fact that now there's a possibility that AI could in fact be destroying networks of weak ties, meaning that instead of going out and introducing yourself to people outside of your direct network to be able to learn about things and to be able to I'm going to stop for a second and talk a little bit about the concept of friction, because when one reaches out and has a discussion with an AI chatbot, there's very little friction. AI does not challenge your questions. It doesn't question why you've asked that question. It doesn't follow through and say, okay, now that you've learned this, what do you do next? These are all things that one does when one's in conversation with another person. The AI conversation, a lot of people find it a lot of fun just, because they go out and they ask a question, they get an answer, and then they move on. But at the end of the day, all they're doing at that point is learning the easy way to get an answer without going through the process of critical thinking, without going the process of even necessarily understanding how to get and ask good questions. So what we're looking at here is the weak ties that we have been encouraging, that students have been building for themselves within the context of the Tiger to Tiger community and a lot of the other community things that we're trying to encourage. Those weak ties, if AI is there to answer people's questions, if you could imagine the students that were reaching out to one another in the pandemic in our Tiger to Tiger community to get confirmation about, am I alone here? Am I the only one that's feeling this way? If they were to ask a chatbot that question, there's certainly a lot less risk in asking a chatbot, but they're designed to be very accommodating, and it would say, oh, don't worry, or whatever it would say, but no real relationships were being formed. You weren't finding a new source of comfort or a new source of solace or a new course of sharing, friendship, as you will. And so the more that a network breaks down, and the more that AI finds itself in the middle of a network, the less human connection takes place. And this, to me, is a really interesting revelation in terms of what AI does and what AI doesn't do. And it's less about, we have a lot of conversations about AI and plagiarism and the fact that students can cheat using AI, but cheating, to me, long term, cheating on an assignment is less of a long-term problem than cheating oneself of relationships with other people and spending one's time reacting with AI, because it's a frictionless process. And so if you think of networks and you think of a healthy network of human beings, there are certain things that are involved in that network. There's a sense of belonging when you're in a network, when you can connect with other people in meaningful ways. There is social capital in network, this cohesion. You can reach out to other people, share ideas, somebody sharing an idea with you, you sharing an idea with them, is an important part of a relationship, and it's an extremely important part of knowledge building. We've been discussing the weak ties, and the weak ties are extremely important to knowledge building. And of course, trust and reciprocity. And we see that if we look at a network, and if we look specifically at this network, you see that once AI at the center of the network, you're going to see a lot of the connection in that network being directed at the AI as opposed to being directed at other people in the network. And while this may be considered to be a positive when you're just out there looking to gain a piece of knowledge that you need to for a course, for an assignment, that is really only a short-term solution, because as it breaks down these networks, it breaks down your ability to be able to go back into that network and get additional information. And more importantly, the other pieces of the network, which are the belonging piece, which is knowing you're connected to others. Just because you ask an AI chatbot to answer a specific question, that doesn't give you any information as to how others might ask that question, how others might process that knowledge. And so once again, you're now in an isolated place in the same way that our students were before we introduced them to Tiger, except now there's sort of this false confidence that they're actually connecting and communicating when all they're doing is connecting and communicating with the AI. And so we go back to what I was talking about earlier in terms of transactional versus transformational. The connection that one has with an AI chatbot is never going to lead to a satisfying relationship that goes past the question and answer stage of a relationship. Whereas when people are talking with one another, they can develop new ideas together. They can reach out and expand their network to other people that they both know, which is going to be a much more satisfying relationship in the long run. And if we move past the idea of transactional versus transformational within the classroom and look at it in real life, if AI gets into the middle of networks and all of a sudden human communication becomes less, that's problematic for us as a society moving forward in terms of not just knowledge building, but for creating new ideas. Because AI doesn't create new ideas. What it does is with all of the understanding of human knowledge, it can basically just take that human knowledge and repackage it and send it back out. But if we're about to look for new ideas in knowledge building, that takes being connected to other people and to be able to move knowledge forward. And so there have been a lot of ideas that even within our Tiger community, there have been suggestions that, okay, how do we introduce AI into this community? And I've not been necessarily a fan of introducing it, but there are ways if one thinks about AI, and I think it's important for us not to think about it as either good or evil. It is something that is, and it's how we use it, it's how we deploy it in specific situations, whether it can be used in a community. The question that's been asked in our community is, how can we use AI not to disrupt the network, not to disrupt the community, but how can we use it to perhaps facilitate connections between people in the community? And that's an interesting process. And so some of the things that we're thinking about is it possible to use AI to connect people who are thinking about the same things or talking about the same things in the community, or who express an interest in certain things and they want to talk to other people who have similar interests or different interests? Can we use AI? I already said earlier that it's been used since the beginning of this process, and that's mostly machine learning, to look at the affect of certain comments so that we know if there are people that are expressing angry thoughts in the community. By the way, one of the first things that people asked as we developed this community is, aren't you afraid that there are going to be a lot of negative comments and that sort of thing on the community? And I will tell you that this community, which has been in play for about 4 years now, has been nothing but civil, where students are talking and being helpful and being supportive. And so I think that's been a real positive. And part of that's been because of the way we framed it within our network. Actually, the students' first access to this community will be through Blackboard. There's an LTI integration there. So we're signaling that as a way for students to understand that this is work related. This is not a place to, this is not a dating site or that sort of thing. This is a legitimate site to talk about things related to their education, whether it's tangential based on their struggles or whether it's directly. We've had students say, hey, I'm taking Spanish 1. I don't get any of this. Will somebody speak Spanish to me? And sure enough, somebody in the community will send them a message in Spanish and reach out and offer to help tutor them. But one of the things that we're looking at here is, can we in fact use AI to sort of spur on the human connection and communication? Or would it be better to leave that alone? And that's a question that remains to be seen. So that's what I have today. So I'm happy to take questions or whatever you'd like to talk about. Thoughts, questions, comments?
I guess they're shy.
Stunned silence.
Yeah. Or you covered everything so well, they have no question.
Well, that's a kind interpretation. Anything else you'd like to know, Bob?
Well, if they, excuse me, they don't have questions, you've done an excellent job. But, uh, or they're hungry and want to go to lunch.
That's possible. Oh, there we go.
Well, let's call it a wrap then. And
Ready?
Andrew, I appreciate you taking time from your schedule to do this for us.
My pleasure.
And excuse me, I'm glad it is lunchtime. Get my voice back in shape.
You're welcome, Alexander.